Would you give us some background on Sodom and Gomorrah, kind of the era it was set in, and how you discovered it, and just bring us up to speed there?
Hey, Mary Nell, you did a little something on this. Just tell about the locations you were there in Genesis.
Yeah, I think it's in the little magazine, but I won't get it out. The description in Genesis of the location of these cities is used as the boundary marker of the eastern division of Canaan. And everybody wants to clump them all together down at the bottom of the Dead Sea. Well, the bottom one is below the Dead Sea, but they go all the way up, quite a few miles above the Dead Sea. And they're scattered, you know, it's Zor, then it's Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, all the way up. And they cover 50, 60, 70 miles from one end to the other.
Okay, the Dead Sea looks kind of like a frankfurter, or, I mean, it's kind of a long,
It's about 50 miles long.
Lake, actually, isn't it? Okay, now, and on the western side of that lake are these cities. Now, how far apart? Now, you said you found 5 sites, and we always think of just Sodom and Gomorrah, but you just mentioned 3 other ones here. And how far apart were they, and did he destroy all 5 of these places?
All right. They are beginning at Zor. This is approximately 5 miles south of the southern end of the Dead Sea. And then Sodom is the next one as you move northward. It's roughly 3 miles to the north. And you remember Lot said this is a little city and it's near. It's close by.
Zor.
When he spoke of Zor and his desire to go there rather than fleeing to the mountains. And then Gomorrah is about 15 miles north of that. And then Admah is another 15 miles north of that place. And then Zeboim is about 30 miles north of Admah. And at each of these places there are incredible concentrations of ash. They are rectangular in shape. Now, one of the geological conclusions that have been reached about this ash prior to our finding these sulfur balls, they say, well, the Dead Sea was much higher before, and these are several hundred feet below present sea level. And they say that this is the sediment that was left behind when the sea evaporated down to its present level. Well, the only problem with that, if that were true, this ash would be uniformly dispersed around the entire bank of the Dead Sea on the east side and on the west side. This is not the case. It is confined to rectangular areas that display shockingly well-preserved remains of Canaanite cities.
Now, most scientists, they believe that Sodom and Gomorrah is under the Red Sea at this point.
If they believe it at all, then they want to say that they're down at the bottom of the sea.
Okay.
Right.
And you found these sites, and in your book it's documented. There's pictures of this rock, and there's all kinds of evidence. In fact, you brought some evidence with you that we can get to.
Let's look at some of that. Let's look at where they were. Now, this is just part of the film. There's a 45-minute presentation. This is a little piece of that.
Okay, what are we seeing here?
Return to these sites.
They're going to talk over this.
5 sites which he had thus far located. I accompanied him this trip along with Marv and Renetta Wilson of Garland, Texas. As we approached the first site we examined, we all could easily see the shapes Ron had described. As no roads led into these areas, we pulled our car off the road and began the long, difficult hike. There was no doubt that these areas were unique to the immediate surrounding area. It was very difficult to walk there, for the loose material made walking an arduous chore. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets. And along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. Over the many years, the ash of these cities had eroded to such a degree that it caused the thick layer of loose ash, which made walking so difficult. This, combined with the heat that was well over 100 degrees and the intense glare of the sun off of the whitish remains, hampered our exploration somewhat. The cities were so large, we knew it would take weeks to complete our exploration of even this one, so we decided to move on to a different area.
Right. Goodness.
You know, I was just under the impression that it was just leveled when the fire came down, but I guess like with what happened to Lot's wife, she turned around, she was turned into a pillar, that these were preserved.
Right.
Is that true, or?
This appears to be the situation, Brian. In 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, in the 6th verse, it says that these are an example. And in the Greek terms there say that it's a visible example of what God will do to the wicked in the future. So these people suffered the vengeance of eternal fire. This is in Jude. And under normal circumstances, we could not expect structures that are recognizable today as buildings and temples and this sort of thing. But God has preserved them so that it becomes obvious to those that are willing to see.